Book review. Book review. Hello, can you hear me? I hate lapels, I hate them so much. Why am I wearing one, you might ask? Well, it's not important, I'm here to talk about a book, but let's just say I'm testing something, okay? Anyway, in today's book review, I'm talking about The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by L Shirer. Actually, just books 1 and 2 of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, because it's a book with 6 parts or 6 books. It's a very long book written by, as I said, L Shirer, who is was an American journalist, and for most of the time period described in the book, he was living in Germany or in Europe as a whole, but a lot of the time in Germany because he was a correspondent for Europe at the time. I think he worked for the Chicago Tribune for some of the time. I don't know if it was the whole time. You can read more about him later. It's not about him, it's about the book. I'm just giving you some idea of the person who wrote the book because, you know, you might be interested. The fascinating thing about this book is that there's so much historically accurate material to describe what happened during that period. And while he does sometimes speak about his experience while being in Germany at the time, he uses a lot and extensively all the material that is available. And it's fascinating because the Nazi government, and even the government before, had a lot of documentation about everything that they did, or most things that they did. And when they didn't have documentation, Goebbels, the minister for propaganda at the time of Hitler, had a diary, and he wrote a lot of stuff in his diary. And after the war, there was a trial, the trial of Nuremberg, where they judged people who participated in Nazi Germany. And there's a lot of stuff that came out there as well. You know, the things that people told, I'm sure that people didn't say everything that happened, and I'm sure that who knows if they manipulated the testimony because they didn't want to look like monsters or more monsters than they already looked like. But this is just to give you an idea that of all the events that happen in history, this one is one that has a lot of available documentation, especially because after the war ended, the US took over Germany and took all those documents. They took them to America. I think it was in a hangar in a place in America for like 10 years until they sent it back to Germany. And for a period of time, all these historians and researchers could come and take photos of everything and have everything documented and stored somewhere. It's fascinating. Now, why would someone like me, who hated history when I was in school, high school, primary school, would want to read a, I don't know, 1400-page book about Nazi history? That's a good question. And also, I'm glad that I didn't really like history when I was in primary and high school, because schools in Brazil teach history from a very biased perspective. But I decided to read this book because, I don't know if you noticed, but people these days have been calling people Nazis and been saying this is literally Hitler, this is literally Nazi, and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, I think they're crazy. But maybe, maybe there's a chance I'm wrong. So maybe I should find out exactly why Hitler came to power and what exactly Nazi Germany was like before I make an informed decision. And let me just say that given how historically accurate this book is and how important the events of the last century are for you to understand today's world and for even make some predictions about the future or even understand what's going on, I think this book is it's recommended for everyone who wants to call someone Hitler, or for everyone who says you're a Nazi. You should read this book, because then if you do and you say it, at least you understand what you're saying. Because I think, hot take here, and I might be wrong, but I think that 99%, I just took that statistics out of my butt, 99% of the people who call someone a Nazi or call whoever Hitler, literally Hitler, have no idea what a Nazi was, or who Hitler really was, or whatever happened at that time. If you're one of those people, don't be a fool. At least learn about it, and then you can make a more informed name calling in the future. Oh gosh. Now let's go to the book. Now this is not a book summary, this is book review. This is not a summary of the first 2 parts of the book. This is just my general impressions and things that really stuck out to me. In the first part of the book, the author is talking about how the National Socialist German Workers' Party came to be, also known as the Nazi Party, in how Hitler became what he became, and some attempts for the Nazi Party to take on power that didn't really succeed. And by the way, which almost ended up killing Hitler, which is, to me, it's fascinating when I'm reading a book and I just think about this actually happened in history, right? And then you read this and like, he almost died. He could have been shot, and then who knows what would have happened? Like, can you, to me, I don't know if it fascinates you as much as it fascinates me, but if he had been shot at the time, maybe history would have been completely different. One of the interesting things about the National Socialist German Workers' Party is that it didn't start as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, but it was just the German Workers' Party. Hitler joined the German Workers' Party, and it was a tiny party with maybe like 7 members or something, and shortly after he claimed the party for himself and changed the name and took over and demanded that people called him their leader. Needless to say, Hitler was someone who really wanted power. He really wanted power. He did not want to be bossed around. He always wanted to be the boss. And even though the party was called National Socialist German Workers' Party, a lot of the names there, they don't have the same meaning that they have for people today, or even for people at the time. It's funny because if you're not a centrist right conservative, you're automatically a Nazi because the Nazis were conservative. But the thing is, when you start to read this and you start to understand history, you realize that conservative at that time didn't mean anything like conservatives today, or at least the mainstream conservatives today. And the same thing for right wing. Right wing at that time, it had maybe not a completely different meaning, but it had a different meaning than it means today. And even though the party had socialist in the name, it's very complicated. There were a lot of socialists in the Nazi party, but Hitler was not really one of them because he hated the communists. He hated the Soviet Union. He wanted to get rid of them. And at the end of the day, you realize that his rhetoric was, some of it came to pass, especially in whatever he wrote in his book, Mein Kampf. Things that he wrote, people thought, oh, this is just crazy talk. But then later on, he actually came in and did them, especially the racist stuff, you know, the Jew hatred stuff, the thing about the Aryan race being the greatest. And I'm not saying that this is what's in the book or what he believed, right? And how the Germans are the ones who brought the most amount of amazing stuff in the world, and more on that later. But the thing is that if you look at the party and the things that he did, and by the way, I only read the first 2 parts yet. There's still 4 more parts in the book about the war and everything else. So maybe in the next videos I will have a different, more precise understanding of this. But there's a lot of elements of socialism and different things in the party platform and beliefs. So it's really hard and intellectually dishonest for people to pick something and say, oh, you do this, they did that as well. Nazi, whatever, because a lot of the things that they believed and they did are not really wrong on themselves, right? Forget about the racist stuff, okay? That's the crazy talk, right? When the Nazi party came to power, he wanted the economy to grow, and you can't just say, oh, you want the economy to grow. No, that's not how things work. Some of the things they did, it was just common sense. Okay, this is gonna be better for Germany. But when you mix that with other things, that's where interesting, bad, horrendous things happen. And moving on to the second part of the book, where it's talking about the rise of the Nazi party to power, you see some things fascinating that really stick out. One of them is that most of the things Hitler did were legal and constitutional. Sometimes they tried to grab power by doing something not so legal and not so constitutional. But from the book you see that Hitler was actually very patient. Whenever people were like, oh, maybe let's try to do this, and I was like, no, let's wait and do this the constitutional way, because maybe he thought this would give his government more legitimacy, right? I don't know, but it's just fascinating how through legal means this terrible party came to power. And let me just say, with a lot of public support, because they elected Nazi party officials to the, what is it called? The equivalent of Congress. There's a German name. Yeah, let's say the parliament, right? And as I said before, Hitler was really patient. It took a long time, it took years, until they finally got majority in the parliament. And then there was a president and a chancellor, and there was this whole political games. And the constitution at the time had a clause, an emergency clause, which gave full power to the chancellor, completely ignoring the parliament, which is I mean, I understand in times of war, it's fascinating that they would give this one person that much power. It's very dangerous. That's why having 3 separate powers, you know, it's so fundamental for a democratic republic like in the United States. You can't, not one of them, the branches, have that much power that you can just at any point decide, well, it's time to do this. I'm just gonna do it, ignore everyone else. But that's when he grabbed that much power. That's what he did, and that's how he Nazified Germany. And one of the things that happened that really tilted the balance in favor of the Nazis getting power was when the parliament caught on fire. And even the story of the parliament catching on fire is not very clear. Who caused it, how it happened. There's some stories that maybe the Nazis put petrol everywhere and then got a communist to go and set the thing on fire. They overheard this guy. That's the part of the story that is not very clear, but that event alone probably was a huge contributor to Hitler getting the power that he wanted. So when people say, oh, the rhetoric, this is gonna destroy the country, blah, 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 blah. It was not this one thing. Like when you read this, you realize that it was not the one thing. There was like so many factors that contributed to it. One of them being the fact that Germany lost the First World War. And the people in Germany were really upset and they were annoyed. They were annoyed they were being subject to a treaty that was so unfair to them, you know, from their eyes. And Hitler was one of the people who thought, this is so unfair, I hate this. Plus the fact that there were paramilitary organizations roaming the streets. The Nazi party had their own, the stormtroopers, but they were not the only ones. The communists had their own paramilitary stuff. Like when you have this type of anarchism on the streets and people just going and being violent towards one another, it's not helpful. It's not helpful. But I think if you didn't have the stormtroopers, if you didn't have the communists fighting and this whole paramilitary stuff happening, I think he wouldn't have reached to the point where he did. Of course, it's hard to operate in, oh, imagine if this happened and if this, he can't. What I'm saying is, from reading the first 2 parts of the book, I'm gonna still have 4 more parts to read. I realized that a lot of people who call other people fascists and Nazis and literally Hitler, they have no idea what they're talking about. And they really should read more about it, just like I did. So one day I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, I think these people were crazy and they're saying it's crazy talk. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe I should learn about it. And didn't change my mind, just made what I believed even stronger, because now I have actual historical understanding to have the opinion that I have. And to conclude, I just want to talk about this other thing that really struck me. It's fascinating. When Hitler and Goebbels Nazified Germany, they really worked really hard on getting into people's minds and getting them to believe what the Nazi party wanted them to believe, which of course created bizarre propaganda and an even more bizarre thing called German science. You see, to Hitler, Jewish science, Jews, that was the wrong type of science. So they created German maths and German physics, and they basically changed science to match the narrative they wanted to push. Now, don't know about you, but that reminds me of some things that happened today. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I've seen so many people saying that logic and reason are tools of the white patriarchy. So there I am listening to the book, and I say listening because I'm listening to it on Audible, and how they're talking about, you know, Hitler thinking, oh no, this science is the tool of the Jewish blah blah blah, and all I can think of is logic and reason and biology and this are the tools of the white patriarchy. And it was like, you see, if I had called those people Nazi, at least I would have some historical reason to do so. And even so, it wouldn't be accurate, or at least not fully accurate. Alright, that's it for book review for today. The next one will come in 2 weeks. I changed my schedule. I'm gonna be doing book reviews every 2 weeks. Hopefully that will actually make me do book reviews on a regular basis. It's hard when you listen to a book that is like 57 hours long. That's why I'm splitting like 3 parts or something. We'll see how it goes. Thanks so much for watching. If you read the book, please let me know what you thought, what your thoughts. Don't spoil the rest of it for me. Not that it's not something that I don't already know how it ends. And if you have any other thoughts, please do let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video so I make more. Yes, thank you, and bye.